Hey everyone, ready for another deep dive. This time we're going to tackle focus.
Ooh,
Yeah,
focus.
and not just like uh the kind where you try to, finish a task, but like the kind that can really make or break a startup.
Like startup level focus.
Exactly. We're talking about, saying no to even good ideas or maybe even finding like one metric to rule them all.
Ooh, I like that.
And even figuring out if you might be, stuck in something called the complexity trap without
Hmm.
even realizing it.
Sounds intense.
That is. And our guide for this deep dive is Focus, Building a Startup That Solves the Right Problems by John Cousins.
Awesome book. I mean, what I really liked about it is that it really goes, beyond those basic kind of generic focus is good
Yeah.
statements. It really digs into the how focus actually works in the real world of startups.
Yeah, that messy world.
Totally.
So speaking of messy,
Yeah.
you mentioned saying no before, and the book talks about how Steve Jobs used that almost like a weapon.
Yeah, he was ruthless.
But I get that saying no can help you prioritize, but like what's so special about that?
Well, it's not just about saying no to distractions, right? It's about strategically saying no to things that might even be good ideas.
Oh, okay.
Like, think about it. Every time you say yes to something, you're saying no to a whole bunch of other things.
That's true.
And Cousins argues that this was like key to Apple's success, back when Jobs was there.
Hmm.
They weren't just building products, they were building like a really carefully crafted ecosystem.
Right.
And that meant making some like hard choices about what fit into that vision and what didn't.
So they were making space for like the really big ideas by saying no to the smaller ones.
Exactly. And the cool thing is, Cousins doesn't just say, like, hey, say no more.
Right.
He gives you like a framework to figure out what to actually say no to.
Okay.
He introduces this idea called one metric that matters, or OMTM.
Okay. I've heard of OMTM, but like, how would a startup actually use that? It seems kind of abstract.
Well, imagine you're a founder and you're trying to decide, like, okay, do we add this new feature
Yeah.
or do we improve our, onboarding process?
Right. Right.
Your OMTM could be something like customer retention rate.
Okay.
So if your data shows that people are like abandoning your product during onboarding,
Uh-huh.
well, then that becomes your focus. Like new features can wait because they don't really directly impact that OMTM.
So it's like a filter for your decisions.
Exactly. And Cousins argues that this kind of laser focus can make a founder like incredibly effective,
Really?
like way more effective, like 2 by 10x even more.
Wow.
It's like a superpower, but instead of flying, it's like the power to just ignore distractions and make every action count.
That's pretty powerful.
Yeah.
But doesn't that sound a little rigid, though? I mean, startups need to be adaptable, right?
Yeah.
What if they, like, miss a big opportunity because they're so focused on this one metric?
It's not about being like stuck on one metric forever.
Okay.
It's about choosing the right metric for like where you are right now
Mhm.
and being willing to change it up as you grow and evolve.
So being strategic, not stubborn. Got it. It's like having a compass.
Yeah.
It points you in the right direction, but you still need to, like, adjust your course as you go.
Perfect analogy. And speaking of like navigating, the startup world, the book talks about this complexity trap that a lot of startups fall into.
Complexity trap.
Yeah. Have you ever felt like super overwhelmed by like too much complexity in your work?
Oh my gosh, all the time.
Yeah.
It's like having a million tabs open and I can't even remember what I was searching for in the first place.
Uh-huh. That's exactly it. Startups, they often try to do too much,
Right.
add too many features, try to be everything to everyone.
Yeah.
But all that complexity, it comes at a cost.
Oh, yeah.
It drains your resources, slows you down, and it can even like turn off your customers.
So how do we escape this trap? Is it just like simplifying everything?
It's about simplifying strategically.
Okay.
It starts with figuring out your core mission. Like, why does your startup even exist? What problem are you solving? Once you have that clear gudgeon, you can start looking at everything you do and asking, like, does this actually contribute to that mission?
So if it doesn't, it's probably adding complexity.
Exactly. Cousins uses the example of Quibi, remember them?
Oh, yeah.
They had tons of funding, celebrities, everything.
Yeah, they did.
But they tried to be everything to everyone, and they ended up appealing to no one.
Yeah, that was a tough one.
So how do we know if our team is actually focused?
Yeah. Are there like signs of good focus versus bad focus?
That's where things get really interesting. The book outlines these hallmarks of a well-focused team.
Okay.
They have that shared vision we talked about.
Right.
Their goals are prioritized. They communicate really well without wasting time in like endless meetings.
Wait, hold on. Short meetings, you say. Tell me more.
Think of it like this. In a well-focused team, meetings are like pit stops in a Formula One race.
Okay.
They're quick, efficient. Everyone knows their role. No one's rambling or going off on tangents.
That sounds amazing.
Right. But what about the flip side? What are the red flags that maybe a team isn't so focused?
Yeah. What should we be looking out for?
One big one is complexity overload.
Oh,
If your team is constantly juggling like a million different things and nothing's really finished, that's a sign.
yeah.
Another one is getting distracted by like every new trend or what your competitors are doing.
Oh, yeah. Chasing butterflies.
Exactly. And then there's the classic problem of unclear goals.
Right.
If people don't know what they're aiming for, how can they possibly stay focused?
Yeah, it's like trying to hit a moving target.
Exactly. And the good news is, Cousins doesn't just point out these problems.
Okay.
He gives you a way to recognize them in your own team.
Oh, that's good.
And he even talks about these hidden costs of poor focus.
Like what?
It's not just about wasting time, right? It's about draining resources and even like crushing team morale.
Wow. Okay. So focus isn't just about efficiency. It's about survival.
Exactly. And distractions, they're going to happen, but the key is to recognize them and manage them. That's where setting clear goals and prioritizing becomes so important.
So how do we actually fix these problems? Like, where do we even begin?
That's a great question, and that's where the book gets really practical.
Okay, good.
Cousins lays out all these strategies for simplifying without sacrificing quality, for setting goals that actually matter, and even for letting go of projects that are just holding you back.
Okay, now we're talking. This is what I need, like actionable advice.
Let's do it.
So let's dive into those strategies next, because I think everyone listening is ready to escape the complexity trap and actually start harnessing the power of focus.
Let's go. You know, one thing that really sets this book apart is that it talks about measuring your progress.
Okay.
Like, it's not enough to just, set goals and try to focus.
Right.
You got to actually track how you're doing.
So like having a fitness tracker, but for your startup.
Exactly. You need to see those numbers to know if you're actually moving in the right direction.
That makes sense.
Mm.
But how do you even know what to measure? Like, especially when you're just starting out.
Well, that's where these things called key performance indicators, or KPIs, come in.
KPIs, okay.
Cousins recommends figuring out which metrics are like the most important for your specific goals.
So not just like vanity metrics that look good, but don't actually tell you anything.
Right. It's got to be about the numbers that actually show you if you're making progress towards what really matters.
So it's like choosing the right gauges for your dashboard.
Yeah.
You want the ones that give you the critical info, not just a bunch of flashing lights.
Exactly. And Cousins makes this really interesting distinction between leading and lagging indicators.
Oh, leading and lagging. What's that?
So leading indicators, they're like your early warning system.
Okay.
They kind of predict future outcomes. Like, say you're an e-commerce startup, website traffic that could be a leading indicator for sales.
Gotcha.
Lagging indicators, they measure stuff that's already happened, like revenue or customer churn rate.
So you need both to get the full picture.
Right. It's like checking your speedometer and D, your fuel gauge.
I like that analogy.
You need to know how fast you're going, A and D, how far you can go.
Makes sense.
Mm.
Okay, so we've got our KPIs, we're tracking our progress, but then what?
Well, data is only good if you actually do something with it, right?
Right.
That's where these things called feedback loops come in.
Feedback loops. Okay, I've heard of those, but I'm not sure I totally get them.
So think of them as like a cycle of learning and improving.
All right.
You look at your data, you figure out what it means, and then you make changes based on what you learn.
So it's not just like set it and forget it,
No way, you got to be actively involved with the data.
using it to make decisions.
Exactly. Cousins recommends having these regular check-ins, like maybe every week or every month, to see how you're doing against your KPIs.
Yeah.
And it's not just about looking at numbers. It's about having real conversations about what's working, what's not, and what needs to change.
So creating a culture of continuous improvement.
Exactly. And it can't just be internal, right?
Oh yeah, you need outside input too.
Absolutely. Cousins really stresses getting feedback from your customers.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
They're the ones you're building this for.
Exactly. Use surveys, interviews, things like Net Promoter Score
Yeah.
to really understand their experience, what they need, what their pain points are.
I got to make sure you're building something people actually want.
Right. And don't forget about your team.
Oh yeah, they have insights too.
They're the ones on the front lines dealing with all the challenges.
Right.
Encourage them to share their observations and suggestions.
So it's about creating a culture where feedback is welcomed from everyone.
Yeah. But it's not just about collecting feedback.
Right.
It's about actually doing something with it.
Closing the loop.
Exactly. If your customers tell you there's a problem with your onboarding process, well, then fix it.
Make those changes.
Yeah. If your team finds a bottleneck in your workflow, address it.
Turn those insights into action.
Right. But how do you actually make those changes when you're a startup and resources are tight?
Yeah, that's a good question.
That's where you got to be really strategic.
Yeah.
Cousins talks about adjusting your focus based on what the data tells you. So being flexible.
Exactly. Startups are always changing, so you got to be willing to adapt.
So wait, does that mean I have to become a data scientist now?
Not necessarily. Cousins provides a framework for like looking at trends and making decisions based on the data.
Okay.
Like if you see that people are dropping off at a certain point in your app,
Uh-huh.
you can focus on improving that specific part of the user experience.
It's like being a detective.
Totally. And one of your best tools is A/B testing.
Oh, yeah. A/B testing.
You can try out different solutions on a small scale before you roll them out to everyone.
That's a good way to avoid making big mistakes.
Exactly. But okay, even with all these tools and strategies, how do you stay focused when everything around you is constantly changing?
That's the million-dollar question, right?
Yeah, the startup world is crazy unpredictable.
Totally. So how do you deal with that chaos?
Well, Cousins has some great advice about that.
Okay, I'm listening.
First things first, you got to stay aligned with your vision.
Your mission.
Yeah, that's your anchor when things get rough. Makes sense. But what if the rough never ends?
Well, that's where monitoring market trends becomes super important.
Okay.
You keep an eye on what's happening in your industry, what your competitors are doing, any new technologies that are popping up.
So you can anticipate change and adapt?
Exactly. It's like having a weather vane
Oh, like that?
to tell you which way the wind is blowing.
So you can adjust your sails.
Exactly. And there are tools that can help you with this, like competitive analysis tools, trend reports, industry newsletters.
Right.
They give you that outside perspective.
So you're not just stuck in your own bubble.
Right. But be careful about information overload.
Oh, yeah, that's a real thing.
It's not just about gathering info, it's about filtering it.
Finding the stuff that's actually relevant.
Exactly. And Prisons talks about building agility into your organization,
Agility, what's that?
having flexible processes, a team structure that can adapt,
Okay.
and a culture that embraces change.
So instead of having like rigid departments,
Yeah.
you have more like cross-functional teams.
Exactly. That way people can move around and work on different things as priorities change.
So you're more responsive.
Right. And communication is key here.
Of course.
Keep your team in the loop about what's happening, why things are changing.
Transparency.
Yeah. It builds trust.
Right.
And when people trust each other, they can handle change better.
Okay. But with all this adapting, how do you stay focused on your core mission?
That's where those feedback loops we talked about are so important.
Right.
Keep getting feedback from your customer, your team, everyone.
So you make sure you're still on the right track.
Exactly. Even as the track is shifting underneath you.
That's a good way to put it. And what about setbacks? Like, how do you deal with those?
Well, Cousins talks about building resilience.
Okay.
Encourage your team to see challenges as opportunities to learn.
So like having a growth mindset.
Exactly. Resilient teams, they can handle the ups and downs without losing sight of their goals.
So it's about having that grit that keeps you going.
Yeah, it's tough to stay focused in a world that's constantly changing.
For sure.
But it's definitely possible if you have the right mindset, the right tools, and the right strategies.
This has been great. We've talked about measuring progress, getting feedback,
Yeah.
adjusting your focus.
Yeah.
It's a lot, but I think it all comes down to making conscious choices,
Yeah.
staying true to your vision,
Yeah,
and always trying to improve.
absolutely. But there's one more thing we got to talk about before we wrap up.
Oh, okay. What's that?
Consistency.
Consistency. But isn't the startup world all about like rapid change and disruption?
Yeah, but Cousins makes a really compelling case for why consistency is actually crucial.
Oh, interesting. Tell me more.
He says it's key for building momentum, gaining customer trust, and creating a stable foundation for growth.
Okay, so why is that? Why is consistency so important?
Well, it's like this, we often think that to stay ahead, we have to be, constantly changing and adapting.
Right? Always pivoting.
But Cousins says that sticking to what works can actually be more effective.
Oh, interesting. So it's not just about making progress, it's about sustainable progress.
Exactly. When you find something that's working, whether it's a process or a product or a strategy,
Yeah.
you can really double down on it, optimize its scale.
Okay.
It also builds trust with your customers.
Oh, how so?
Well, if you're always changing things up, your offerings, your pricing, it can be confusing.
Right.
And people might start to lose faith in,
You don't know what to expect.
right. And internally, consistency helps your team feel more confident.
Oh,
Everyone knows what's going on, and they can just focus on doing their work instead of constantly having to adjust to new things.
So it's like building a house.
Yeah,
You need a solid foundation before you can start adding all the fancy stuff.
exactly. Consistency is that foundation for sustainable growth.
So it's not that you can't innovate or adapt.
Right.
It's about being strategic about it.
Exactly. Finding that sweet spot between stability and innovation.
So how do you know when it's time to change course? Like, how do you balance consistency with the need to adapt?
That's a great question, and it's something every startup has to figure out. But Cousins gives some good guidance.
Okay.
He says you got to keep doing the things we talked about before, like monitoring your metrics, listening to feedback, watching market trends,
Right.
and paying attention to any problems that come up internally.
So being data-driven, customer-centric, and self-aware.
Exactly. It all comes back to those core principles.
So it's not about being stubborn and sticking to the plan no matter what.
No.
It's about making smart decisions about when to stay the course and when to make a change.
Exactly. So how do we actually build that resilient, consistent approach that Cousins talks about?
Yeah, that's what I want to know.
Well, he has some great tips.
Yeah.
One is to focus on your core strengths.
Okay.
Like, what are you really good at? What makes you different from everyone else?
Right.
Build your strategy around those things.
Got it. But what if the market changes and your strengths aren't relevant anymore?
That's why it's so important to have a clear, long-term vision.
Okay.
That vision acts as your guide through all the changes and helps you stay focused on where you want to go.
So it's not just about knowing your strengths now.
Right.
It's about having a vision for the future.
Exactly. And even with a clear vision, things can still get messy.
Oh, for sure. Startups are all about chaos.
Yeah. So Cousins emphasizes the importance of standardizing your processes.
Okay.
Create clear, repeatable workflows for those critical tasks.
So you're not reinventing the wheel every time.
Right. It reduces errors and makes things more efficient as you grow.
Makes sense. But doesn't that stifle innovation? Like if everything's so standardized.
Not necessarily. Cousins actually argues that it can help innovation.
Really?
Yeah, because it frees up your team's time and energy to focus on the more creative, strategic stuff.
Oh, so you're automating the routine so you can focus on the exceptional.
Exactly. And along with standardization, Cousins encourages a culture of incremental improvement.
Okay.
Small, consistent changes can make a big difference over time.
It's like the compound effect.
Right. And they're usually easier to implement than big, sweeping changes.
Makes sense. So it's about making those small steps forward even when everything feels chaotic.
Exactly. And as always, communication is key.
Uh-huh.
Be open with your team about your strategy, your goals, any changes you're making.
Transparency.
Yeah, it helps everyone stay aligned and reduces resistance to change.
It's about bringing everyone along on the journey.
Exactly. And finally, don't be afraid to be flexible.
Okay.
Consistency is important, but it shouldn't come at the expense of adaptability.
Right.
Be willing to experiment, test new things on a small scale before you go all in.
So finding that balance between sticking to what works and being open to new ideas.
Exactly. There's no one right answer. It depends on your startup, your industry, your stage of growth.
This has been a great discussion about building a strong foundation for a startup.
Yeah, it's been fun.
We've talked about measuring progress, getting feedback, adjusting our focus, embracing consistency.
A lot of good stuff.
It's a lot to take in, but I think it boils down to this focus is about making conscious choices, staying true to your vision,
Yep.
and always striving to get better.
Absolutely. But before we wrap up completely, I want to talk about the ending of the book.
Okay, what does Cousins leave us with?
He gives us this really powerful challenge.
Oh, okay.
He says, build a company that not only achieves its goals,
Uh-huh.
but also makes a positive impact on the world.
Wow. So it's not just about success, it's about significance.
Exactly. So I'll ask our listeners this: what impact do you want to make?
Ooh, good question.
And how can focusing on the right things help you get there?
That's a great question to ponder. It's a reminder that focus isn't just about productivity or profits.
No.
It's about aligning our work with our values and trying to make a real difference in the world.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Well, this has been an awesome deep dive into focus.
It has.
Thanks for joining us, everyone. We hope you learned some valuable insights that you can use in your own work and life.
And remember, focus is a choice.
You've got this.